Good afternoon. My name is Carol Burkett. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff for Orange County Mayor Jerry Demings. Thank you so much for attending the third meeting of the Orange County Citizen Safety Task Force. Before we begin, I want to do a few housekeeping. Everyone has a mic in front of them. When you go to use your mic, just press it once, and you will see a green light so you can speak, and then press it again, and that will turn it off. The other thing, we have several of our subcommittee co-chairs presenting. You're going to see on the podium, this is your clicker to advance your slides as you go through your presentation. So I just wanted to point those two things out before I turn it over to Orange County Mayor Jerry Demings, co-chairs of the Orange County Citizen Task Force, Co-Chair Love and Co-Chair Coffin, to begin our meeting. Thank you.
To all of us, and so now that we have entered 2021, I'm looking up, and one of the ways that I'm looking up is to the work that this task force will do and the recommendations that will come forward. I believe it was yesterday, heard a little bit from several of the members of the task force and subcommittee meetings, and they sounded somewhat discouraged about whether or not the work that you're doing is a meaningful work. And let me just remind all of you that you are broad representatives of our entire community. And I believe that each one of you have the passion to make a difference in our community. And I am looking forward to your recommendations so that we can implement and execute those recommendations. If you start out in advance believing that you won't make a difference, perhaps you won't. But if you, through your collective spirits and passions, believe that the work that you're doing will have a significant impact on this community, then I think it will, because other people have to see your leadership, they have to see your commitment and your spirit to having the need to bring about positive change within our community. So that's our goal. There is a way for us to get to that point where we can see violent crime and overall crime in our community reduce. So I just want you to remember to stay focused on the reason why we brought this body together. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to our chairs, and I do appreciate the work that our chairs have been doing to help to lead you through the various conversations. And we knew in the beginning that they would be conversations that would move people in certain directions. So don't give up on the process before we ever complete the process. And thank you again. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Once again, my name is Rod Love. I'm the co-chair of the Orange County Citizen Safety Task Force. I would ask my co-chair, Mr. Jim Coffin, if you would please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I'd invite you to join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Co-Chair. I would like to welcome everybody today to the third meeting of the Orange County Citizen Safety Task Force. Since we began our work November the 6th, the four subcommittees have held 20 meetings in excess of over 80 hours of engagement. I want to personally thank the members, the presenters, and the members from the community that have attended to let us know what their thoughts are on increasing public safety and remedying some of the issues that we're addressing. I appreciate the passion, and at times, as the mayor mentioned, we're having a lot of uncomfortable conversation that needs to be had. But it takes this type of effort to get the solutions that the community needs. With that, I'd like to turn it over to my co-chair, Mr. Coffin.
We'd like to take the roll at this time, and so I would ask that you say present or here. And if you happen to be representing someone else, if you could just mention who you are so that we know who you are representing that person. Rachel Allen. Here. Honorable Monique Worrell. Rolando Bailey. Rolando Bailey. Patricia Brigham. Here. Charles Brown. Charles Brown. Lisa Coffey. Ruth Sedeno. Mimi Chen.
Present.
Bishop Kelvin Cobaris.
Present.
Jonathan Cox. Jonathan Cox. Fernando Cuevas. Fernando Cuevas. TJ Legacy Cole. Eric Dubose.
Present.
Lisa Early. Alondra Gittleson. Alondra Gittleson. Pastor Terrence Gray. Pastor Terrence Gray. Roger Henberg.
Present.
Adam Hartnett. Adam Hartnett. Corey Austin Jackson. Corey Austin Jackson. Subhash Katil. Subhash Katil. Samantha Love. Samantha Love. Ricky Lee. Ricky Lee. Bishop-elect Derek McCrae.
Present.
Chief Mike McKinley.
Here.
Honorable John Mina.
Present.
Miles Mulrain. Miles Mulrain. Maisha Murray. Maisha Murray. Nancy Osh.
Here.
Javier Andres Pinero. Chief Orlando Roland.
Rich Lane, standing up for Orlando, Chief Roland.
Thank you. Patricia Rump. Ruben Saldana. Reverend Gabriel Salguero. Michael Scott.
Here.
Andres Toro. Andres Toro. Thank you very much.
The draft minutes have been provided to members for review. Are there any changes to the minutes? If hearing no changes, do I have a motion to approve the minutes? A motion to approve the minutes.
I so move to approve the minutes.
Do I have a second? We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, aye. Any dissents? Thank you for the minutes. The minutes are approved.
At this time, I would ask the Orange County staff if we have any members of the community who have filled out a speaker card. And if any of you have filled out a card, we would ask you to come forward so that you're ready to speak. And in addition, please read any public comments that we received online, and we'll add that to the public record. And please note the public comments received that do not include the required information will not be read. Comments that, please note that the time allocated for each individual who makes a public comment is 3 minutes. So do we have any who are going to be giving comment today?
Thank you, Co-Chair Coffin. We do not have anyone present from the community that has completed a speaker card, and we did not receive any comments online. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to recognize Sheriff Tom Meany of the Orange County Sheriff's Office to provide an update. Thank you, Sheriff Meany.
Well, and then thank you for allowing me to do just I'm going to be very brief. But first, what I wanted to say, since it is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday today, and we will celebrate on Monday. I'm proud to announce that our very own Undersheriff Mark Canty has received the Martin Luther King Drum Major Award for Social Justice, and he's here. Mark, you stand up so we can recognize you? Thank you for allowing me to do that. We're very proud of him and the work he has done in our community. So over the past two task force meetings, there has been much discussion about arrests of juveniles in our community, and rightly so. And so I wanted to provide some statistics and show this graph that really shows our commitment to that philosophy. And I've said in this meeting, the last thing that our deputies want to do is arrest kids. That's not why we came into this profession. We came into this profession to help people. So as you could see, going way back since 2014, compared to last year, we had a 67% decrease in juvenile arrests. And I will note that the majority of the arrests that we make, most of the arrests, are for felony crimes, burglary, robbery, carjacking, sexual battery, even homicide, and felony drug possession. So, but the good news is we are headed in the right direction in this community. We all realize, and I meet with the chiefs every single month, so their numbers are very, very similar, although I don't have them today. But we are all have that same philosophy, and our focus is on violent crimes and those offenders who continue to commit violent crimes in our communities. So just a brief overview of our arrests of juveniles. As you say, we are headed in the right direction here in Orange County. The other thing I just wanted to cover very briefly, we did have two homicides earlier this week. All of both the victims and the suspects were involved in the drug trade. This was not gang related, but it was as a result of criminal activity that we believe is happening. Some type of dispute over money and or drugs is our initial thoughts. So just wanted to kind of give a brief update on that. And then, so last year in Orange County, we ended the year with an 18% decrease in overall crime. Our homicides were up, but the good news is that our homicide detectives, with the help of our community, finished with a 75% clearance rate. So that is the rate that we calculate solved homicides. So through great detective work, through community leads and tips, we were able to solve 3 out of every 4 homicides that happened in Orange County. And so that 75% is well above the national average for homicide solve rate, which is usually about between 50 and 60%. So we're doing a good job in that respect. Lots more work to do. Since we started our gang operation with the Orlando Police Department, the Orange County Sheriff's Office, with the help of the U.S. Attorney's Office, the FBI, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, we have not had any gang-related homicides, and we have done a good job of suppressing and deterring a lot of that violence that we saw earlier this year, leading up into summer, that really precipitated this task force. So I'm happy to take any questions from anyone if you have any.
Sheriff Mina, if you would, thank you for being here today, first and foremost, but also, what do you envision the sustainability of the trend going down as it relates to juvenile arrest that we see here today?
Absolutely. So a couple of things. Like I said, several years ago, when I was chief in Orlando, when the mayor was sheriff in Orange County, we all decided that as a community in Orange County, Central Florida, compared to the rest of the states, we were behind as far as arresting juveniles, not giving enough juvenile civil citations. And it's more or less a philosophy of law enforcement in this area based on what the community wants and needs. And we totally agree with that. We've had many meetings with Department of Juvenile Justice over the past several years related to this, meetings with the League of Women Voters related to this, and we promised and committed, back in those early years that we were committed to arresting less juveniles. We know that kids who are arrested are more likely to reoffend. Some of these cases, like I said, they're very serious crimes. A lot of that is out of our hands, but if we can get a juvenile to a juvenile civil citation, or we could just turn them over to their parents, or simply focus our efforts on people who are actually committing violent crimes in our community, who are reoffending in our community. That's where we're focusing our efforts, rather than minor offenses for juveniles. So the other thing I will say, and I will give Orange County Public Schools a lot of credit for this, they embarked on a program several years ago to really handle those cases, administrative cases, administratively. So in other words, the violation of school rules and all those things, although we have school resource officers and deputies, we don't need to handle that. We don't need to even go to those type of violations. And so I think that really helped in this situation, and will continue to help.
Thank you. Any questions for the sheriff from any of the task force members? Mr. DeBose, you're recognized.
A question, I hope it's a statement, but I hope I share the hearts of everybody here. First, I want to commend the efforts of the law enforcement for being here, especially with the Sheriff's Office, Orlando Police Department, and the Poplar Police. But I want to say this, law enforcement must not lose sight of their primary focus, to enforce the laws of the state of Florida, to protect the citizens of Orange County. And I hope that as we sit here and we collaborate all together, we can come up with something that's going to benefit our community. But thinking about everything, all the boards, the meetings that we've had, and I've been on the prevention and also enforcement, I want to make sure that law enforcement understands that we do believe and we do understand that their primary focus is enforcement. Now, there is some attributes that contribute to the success and failures of juveniles in Orange County. We do understand that. And hopefully through a collective effort and partnerships, from here we can come up with something that will even the playing field as such. But again, I just want to commend law enforcement for even being here and working with us towards those goals. So I just want to go on the record with saying that.
Well, thank you, and I can assure you that is our top priority is the safety and security of the residents in our community.
Thank you. Pastor Salgado, you're recognized.
I want to echo our appreciation for law enforcement being part of this task force. Also want to wish you a happy Dr. King's birthday, and to your officer for his award. We affirm and applaud him. My question is about an apples-to-apples comparison with other counties across the state of Florida. How do we compare with juvenile arrest with other counties across the state of Florida? And are we picking up best practices from other counties who may have a lower juvenile arrest record? And so I don't know that information. It's a genuine question.
Absolutely. So that's a great question, Pastor. So historically, Orange County has lagged behind other jurisdictions in the state of Florida. We recognized that a long time ago. So you see the decrease in juvenile arrest. So what we've done, especially as it relates to juvenile civil citations, we've really changed our policy to make it easier or to not prohibit deputies from giving juvenile civil citations. And so a lot of those new policies we have gotten from Pinellas County or down south in Broward County, and to see how they do it as well. So we are looking at best practices around the state to continue this significant downward trend of juveniles under arrest.
If I could have a follow-up.
You're recognized.
Thank you. First, I appreciate you doing that research. If maybe we at the Prevention Subcommittee could get some of the rates of decline of juvenile arrest over that span period and the practices that have led to that, that would be helpful for our report to the mayor and to the task force. So not just how we compare to other counties, but how are we doing in reference to ourselves over a 3-year period, over a 5-year period. You may or may not have that data, but that would be helpful to us because that helps us measure trends.
Absolutely. We can provide any stats that are asked of us.
Thank you. Seeing no other comment, statement for Sheriff Mina. Sheriff Mina, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you.
As all of you know, because you've been working hard on the subcommittees, we have subcommittees, and that's where a lot of the really tough work takes place. It's also where some of the most interesting things take place because of the presentations that are given and the discussions that are engaged in. And today we have the 4 subcommittee representatives here with us here today, and they will be giving us a brief presentation. And I would mention that you have 5 minutes each, and there is a clock here to kind of let you know. And anyway, I would like to introduce Lisa Early from the Prevention Subcommittee, one of the co-chairs, who's going to tell us about what they're up to. And thank you so much, Lisa. And I would just like to say a big thank you to the co-chairs, because there's a tremendous amount of work that they're doing. And I'd like to say a big thank you to all who are participating on the committees, because you're doing a great job. Rome wasn't built in a day. It takes a while to get some of these things done, but Rome did last a long time, and we hope our work lasts a long time too.
Just before I start, where is the thing to forward the slideshow? It's on here? Carol.
Carol, could you give her some instruction here? Thank you.
Which is the one to advance? Is it this? Okay, gotcha. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it. Sheriff Mina, appreciate hearing you speak. I had the privilege to work alongside you when you were chief of OPD, and it was an honor to work alongside you and to see the difficult work that you put in to reform OPD over the years that you were there, along with Deputy Chief Canty in the back, who got the award. I know you're very committed to this work, and I appreciate everything you're doing. And in follow-up to Pastor Salguero, who asked for a little bit more data, one of the conversations we've had at the Prevention Committee has been around crime statistics, and you did mention that most of the arrests are for serious crimes, felonies, but a lot of the data that we've seen so far are minor crimes, minor crimes like criminal mischief or failure to appear or resisting without violence, those kinds of things. So if we could get a deep dive into what those arrests were for, it would be helpful, because our recommendations are coming a lot based on the data. So to see that would be helpful as well. But that's a follow-up conversation. Okay, I put your attention to the screen now. Thank you to the members of the Prevention Subcommittee, many of whom are here today. You see their names listed here. It is a great team, and we are out there to do great things, so thank you to everybody. So these are the major themes of our subcommittee, right? Number 1, addressing poverty and family economic insecurity. Number 2, ensuring access to effective youth and parenting programs. Number 3, reforming the criminal justice system. Number 4, reducing access to guns. Number 5, increasing community awareness of issues and programs. And lastly, improving overall neighborhood conditions. I'm not going to get into depth here about most of these, maybe just a couple of them. But before I get into addressing them, we did come up with a mission statement for our committee, and I'm going to read it to you. The purpose of the Prevention Committee is to research and recommend programs, policies, and priorities for Orange County government to implement to reduce the incidence of gun violence and violent crime in Orange County. We as a committee have also agreed that we're going to focus on approximately the age 13 to 25 population, particularly in those communities in Orange County where the incidence of violent crime has been the highest. So that is our key focus. As I get into these particular points, the ones I want to look into are the number 1, addressing poverty and family economic insecurity, and number 2, reforming the criminal justice system, which are intertwined. And so I'm just going to say one thing, that in reading a recent research that was put out by the Brookings Institute, where they looked at data on 2.9 million prisoners across the country. According to the study, boys who grew up in families within the bottom 10% of income distribution were 20 times more likely to be incarcerated by their early 30s than those who lived in families with the highest income level. The Brookings data showed that, quote, in almost all states, between 40 and 50% of the prison population grew up in families in the bottom 20% of the income distribution. 3 years prior to incarceration, only 49% of prime-age men were employed, and when employed, their median earnings were only $6,250 a year. So think about that and think about what our focus should be in terms of trying to prevent violent crime. If you drill down into data on Orange County, you can also see, and this would be interesting too for the crime data, where are the arrests being made? What population in the neighborhoods? What is the impact of poverty and race on arrests? And the data that we found from the DJJ show, they do analysis of what they call disproportionate arrests by race, and you can see that there are disproportionate arrests of young black men in Orange County compared to their overall population in our community. So that is a target and a focus. How do we address disproportionate arrests? And I would suggest that there be an effort to try to close the gap in arrests between the overall population numbers and the actual number of people being arrested. I've got 50 seconds, so I'm going to just jump into this, and this is the Reforming Criminal Justice. It says, this is a quote from a longtime advocate of criminal justice reform. The system will take Poverty causes crime and crime causes poverty. The system will take relatively minor offenses, turn them into criminal convictions. Unable to afford expensive legal representation, the poor, when they find themselves in need of legal defense, usually have no other recourse than to secure a public defender. And oftentimes, after a young man is convicted and serves his time, he now has the added burden of a felony on his record. The system ensures that a young man is never going to be employed. This is going to cause poverty. So our focus is really on investing more funds to effectively engage the target population. Again, that's youth ages 13 to 25 residing in the neighborhoods where crime is the highest, and investing in programs to prevent violence, and specifically programs that are run by what we call credible messengers, people who have long-standing relationships in the neighborhood, who have been doing this work often without any kind of funding for a long, long time, who are trusted by the youth in the neighborhood, and doing programs that are the basic kinds of things, connecting youth to pro-social caring adults, engaging them in life skills and leadership training, educational enrichments and opportunities, youth events, employment, programs that support their academic success. So that's where our focus is, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Early. Thank you for the update. It's my pleasure to introduce Bishop Kevin Cabarrus, co-chair of the Intervention Subcommittee, for an update.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. As an update from our Intervention Subcommittee, of course, we greet Mayor Dimmons and our two co-chairs, and we appreciate you for your leadership. This subcommittee has a group of great minds that are listed on the screen, and we are co-chaired by myself and, of course, Samantha Love. But I just want to quickly go through the themes that we have over the last few meetings after hearing presentations and data have come up with in the direction that we're heading in. One of them is, of course, to assess the trauma-informed care best practices and incorporate them in the service delivery plan, which is our adverse childhood experiences, to collaborate with social service programs that concentrate on mental health counseling, to educate and train families, youth, and the community on an at-risk behaviors and preventive methods, and to incorporate homegrown programs that provide a holistic approach and utilize services such as credible messengers, non-traditional arts, and grassroots program models. In essence, the Intervention Subcommittee integrates and comes together with the Prevention Subcommittee. There's a lot of things you've heard mentioned prior, some of the same focuses that we're having now. But I would like to highlight in our themes, which will pretty much summarize the direction that we're going in. What we want to do, as you saw in that last part, said programs that provide a holistic approach and utilize services such as credible messengers and traditional arts and grassroots programs. We want to look at programs that have already existed in the past that have worked, and that could possibly, with funding and sustainability, could create a holistic approach that would not just deal with the youthful offender, but also to be a proactive approach to mentor young people to keep them from ever going into a life of committing any offense. But not only focusing on the youth and the youthful offenders, but also focusing on the family, because what is the need of rebuilding or rehabilitating or having a strong young person if you don't create a functional home, a functional environment for them to coexist in? So with our focus is looking at a theme that will pretty much deal with, of course, our young people, their families through mental health counseling and education, not only for them and their families, but to educate our community on the different intervention measures that can be used to step in to, of course, help end and reduce our plight of violence and, of course, creating a public safety. So our committee is working very, very hard, and we're looking forward to our public meeting between the Prevention and Intervention Committee, which will again allow us to hear from the community so that they can give suggestions and highlights to make sure that the plans that we're coming up with to present as these themes, that we're on track and that we're hearing from them to make sure that we can also implement those items as best practices. I will end my time here because I went over last time, and if you have any questions, I look forward to entertain them in open discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop.
And at this time, I'd like to introduce Patricia Rump, the Enforcement Subcommittee Chair, Co-Chair. And so thank you very much, Patricia.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for this opportunity, Mayor and our co-chairs. So we click this little button. Let me see. Okay. We're going to thank you for this time. And we're on the Law Enforcement Committee. And I've been working with a great group of law enforcement throughout Apopka, Orange County, and Orlando Department. And so we got a great group of people and others not necessarily in law enforcement, but they have a career in corrections. And our focus has not changed. And our focus has been, I want to read our overall goal that was set to us. And the goal of the whole task force is the Orange County Citizen Safety Task Force goal is to identify solutions and strategies to reduce and prevent gun violence and violent crime in the community. So law enforcement focused primarily on gun violence and gang in the community with our ideas. So our four main areas has not changed since our first presentation. We're still focusing on the targeting and enforcement area. We're still focusing on legislative and advocacy and policies, and also partnership. And the fourth thing we're focusing on is increasing our law enforcement participation with a joint effort. So back to the targeting area, we're still concerned about law enforcement. Like Eric DeBose said earlier, law enforcement is to enforce the law. So we want to enforce the law to reduce gun violence and gang, and retargeting. We believe the best way to law enforcement to do that is to target the hot spots. We talked with several law enforcement, and we read several articles, and they all have a common theme. They know when the certain people are released back into the community because crime has increased. And as law enforcement job is to target those areas. We want those crime for the gangs and violence to decrease. We looked at areas to continue to look at legislations. Sheriff Mina said last time that he's working on legislation in Tallahassee to work with pawn shops and those that sell guns to make sure they are secured properly. We're still following those legislations and policies. And locally, we want to talk about more about the PTR, the pretrial release through Orange County. We learned that we are partnership with other agencies that was not called to the table, such as Florida Department of Corrections, Orange County Corrections. So we called them to our meeting. We learned certain things that we are working jointly with those agencies, the officers on the streets, the sheriff department, the police department are being notified through 911 and crime prevention and corrections and Florida Department of Corrections when certain offenders hit the streets. So we are working together to make sure that we're targeting those areas. We also working with our joint partnership with the community. We know this is very important that we get the community engaged, our faith community engaged, but we also learn from officers on the street that some of the communities, when these crimes occur, they want to handle this themselves. It's not necessarily that they don't trust law enforcement, but this is what the game keep going because they say we would take care of this ourselves. So we're learning how, we're working with those agencies to learn more about how to get the community more involved. And we also talked about once we correct the problem and reduce the crime in the community, another part of enforcement is working with agencies, such as making sure that the street lights in the communities are working. Not to ride through a community where there's a dozen of street lights out. That's part of the broken problem, and that's part of the blight in the community. So we thought that working with the community that way and other agencies that's partnering with Orange County to make sure that these communities are in the best conditions as far as affordable housing and the community is being safe. So I'm trying to get a lot in this 50 seconds left. So our next step is, and we did entertain, even though we know our main goal is to crime and gun violence, we did entertain the thought of how law enforcement could engage in misdemeanor arrests. When you stop somebody with a broken tail light, stop that person with that broken tail light and leave it at that. Don't let your next question be, can I search your car? So you ask us to learn how to interact with law enforcement. You also ask law enforcement to learn how to interact when they make an arrest. Our step forward is to work with prosecution. At law enforcement, in 30 years myself, we know that we can take care and do our job, but if we don't get the prosecution on board with us to proceed, then we're back in the position where we was, and the crimes, again, is back on the street again. Thank you very much for this time.
Thank you. You know, that was a perfect segue into introducing the co-chairs of the Prosecution Subcommittee, and that is Patricia Brigham and Bishop-elect Derek McCray. Please come up to provide your update. While you're on your way, you know, I'll do the little commercial piece, but it has been an excellent experience to see the subcommittee groups work together to exchange ideas and working with the community, and you're going to continue to hear that when we head to the open discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair Love, and I'd like to thank co-chairs, Co-Chair Coffin as well, and the mayor. The Prosecution Subcommittee has been hard at work, and I'm looking for the clicker here. Okay, as you will see, our members are listed there. We're very pleased to have a very good team, and I'd like to thank our co-chair, Bishop Derek McCray, for all of his extremely valuable input and for all of the members' participation in what we are doing. And I'm going to be very candid with this task force. We have had some significant challenges because as a prosecution subcommittee, we need the full participation of the state attorney's office, and we have yet to receive it. We've had one meeting where the previous state attorney was in attendance. We do understand that there's an outgoing state attorney and an incoming, but our subcommittee has been tasked with the hard issue of prosecuting criminals, particularly those committing gun violence. And so we look forward to hearing the recommendations and answers to the many questions that we have of our prosecutors. We have various themes that we are working on, and we have many questions about them. As you see there, one of the top concerns we have as we have looked through case files on Orange County arrests, are those suspects released on pretrial without supervision. What we need to know is how many of those alleged criminals are being released from the time that they go to trial and the time that they are arrested. If they are released before they go to trial, do they go on to commit another crime? And looking at some of the cases we have seen, for example, someone accused of domestic violence with aggravated assault let out ahead of trial. That's dangerous, as many people go on to commit more serious acts of domestic violence once police get involved. That leads us to having looked at a very difficult issue, and of course it's an uncomfortable conversation, which these are necessary to have. Domestic violence, numerous studies show that there are 2 to 4 times higher instances among law enforcement in communities than in the general population. And in the National Center for Women and Policing, at least 40% of law enforcement families experience domestic violence. We're looking at risk protection orders, which permits police, law enforcement officers, sheriff's deputies to intervene when there is a case of domestic violence in a family and go through their own attorneys and petition a court to take guns away in a case where someone is a danger to him or herself, particularly in domestic violence cases. But if there is a problem with domestic violence among law enforcement, we have to really ask ourselves critically, is there any kind of subconscious bias going into these homes when there is a domestic violence issue? We are also looking at, with the help of the U.S. Attorney, thank you very much to him, into geographic stewardship, where in some communities, state attorneys or assistant state attorneys have gone into communities where there is a large or a significant amount of violence and lived among those communities to build trust and hopefully to reduce violence. I've mentioned the protection orders. We're also looking at the bond bail considerations. Once again, you know, we need answers from our state attorney's office as to how the release of violent criminals takes place, what happens after they're released before trial, and what are the terms of bonding when it comes to that. So, we have upcoming discussions on pretrial diversion for our youth, on obtaining data for tracking arrests. That's critical data for us to have, and on identifying what is known as a smart focus, these items for final recommendation, and we are not yet at the point where we can discuss the smart focus. That is one of our next meetings. So I'm out of time. I thank you very much, and we look forward to our continued work with other subcommittees, because all of these issues intersect, and we look forward to working with the State Attorney's Office. Thank you.
Thank you, Co-Chair Brigham. Thank you for that update. We've reached the point, and we heard everybody loud and clear at the last meeting, and so we've set aside almost an hour for questions, comments, and dialogue between task force members. So at this point in forum, we're going to ask that we have that exchange, and that exchange is very succinct. So at this point in time, I would like to open up the floor to task force members.
And we're asking that you keep your comment to 2 minutes, and then we can come back and have further discussion, but make your initial presentation as quickly as possible.
Task Force Member Cabarrus, you're recognized.
Thank you, Co-Chair Love. This question is toward the Prosecution Subcommittee and probably the State Attorney's Office. I am very concerned about the pretrial release. The work that we're doing here as a task force will be futile and void if we are releasing violent offenders early prior to their court date without true supervision and true accountability. And I really would like to know, it's concerning that the state attorney's office did not participate as they should have in the prosecution committee, but I'm so glad to have our newly elected Madam State Attorney, who I'm looking forward to working with and looking forward to seeing her vision and direction as it relates to my question with pretrial release. I really want to get to the bottom of how this whole pretrial release thing go, who is providing oversight over it, and are these violent offenders reoffending when they are offending again when they are released prior to trial. That is concerning because, again, if we're asking the community to talk about what they know, and possibly the person who committed a crime is being released the same day that they've committed, no one is going to talk, and that is a threat to public safety, and it is a serious concern today.
Thank you. Thank you, Bishop Cabarrus. State Attorney, we're glad to have you here. You're recognized.
I'd just like to point out that this is the conclusion of my first full week in office. So while I will not make any comments on behalf of the prior administration, I'll just reiterate that it's the end of my first full week in office. So while we certainly fully intend to participate in the discussions going forward, I think it is controversial at best to talk about participation from the state attorney's office, recognizing that there is a new state attorney.
Thank you. Any other questions? Bishop Cabarrus, you're recognized.
Do you all? Okay. All right, that's better. Madam State Attorney, I do agree and concur, and that my question was not to target you in any way. I know that you're the newly elected state attorney, but what I wanted to do is put an emphasis on how serious this matter is, and we look forward to working with your office, and not only you, but Chief Judge Myers, who's ever in the correction administration, whoever has anything to do with pretrial release needs to speak to this task force and to this community and need to be held accountable for how this is being carried out, because this is a concern of public safety. So the whole ideal of this statement is that it will go on record that we want some discussion and some participation from the state attorney's office, which I believe that we will get. But I just wanted to put an emphasis that this is a concern not only of the prosecution committee, but it's a concern of the community at large.
Thank you. Roger Hamburg, you're recognized. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Your concern is noted, and we will look into that issue, what the questions and concerns are, and we'll provide a response to that.
Thank you. Task Force Member Hamburg, you're recognized.
Thank you, Co-Chair Love. Bishop, I just want to make sure that you know that the state attorney's timing couldn't have been better, because we are going to do exactly what you've asked us to do. Our next meeting is a joint meeting with enforcement, and we're going to bring Chief Judge Myers and Judge O'Kane, who's the administrative judge for the criminal side, and working with the state attorney's office, we're going to have that conversation about pretrial release. And just so everyone here knows, there's an administrative order that the chief judge does that talks about pretrial release and bond. And we've been talking about that, but we're going to have a fulsome discussion with the state attorney's office participation, and we're looking forward to having the state attorney's office as part of that. But they have not missed that important conversation. We're going to do that at our next meeting on the 25th.
Thank you, Mr. Hamburg. And just for all of the task force members' benefit, that there's been a number of joint subcommittee meetings that have taken place, as well as the exchange of members going to subcommittees that they're not assigned to. So there's a great deal of interaction, and we're definitely grateful for that. With that, I'm looking for comments, statements. Task Force Member Brigham, you're recognized.
Thank you, Co-Chair Love.
Thank you, Madam State Attorney. This was not a personal attack on you. We understand that there was an outgoing and an incoming state attorney, but we certainly are looking forward to talking with you, having you answer our questions, or if you are unable to attend any of our subcommittee meetings, we understand you have a busy schedule, if you could send a representative from the state attorney's office, because a representative from the state attorney's office accepting one of our subcommittee meetings has been very much noticed, the absence of. Thank you.
Task Force Member Legacy, you're recognized.
Yes. I just wanted to everybody to be mindful of, their words, because although it was stated that that wasn't an attack on the current state attorney or the other state attorney, the minute that you said what you said about the previous administration, my phone blew up with local activists like, who is this lady and why are they coming at our newly elected state attorney, which defeats the purpose when we're talking about how the community perceives the people that are actually on this task force. Besides that, so I just wanted to bring that little nugget of information. And from what I'm hearing, and we've been at this for a little while now, is that I'm hearing from the enforcement committee that we want to hit the hot spots and we want to enforce, and we're hearing from, as far as locking people up and making sure that, I wrote it down, the criminals, the violent criminals before trials, I don't know if they're, considered criminals if you're not convicted and you're waiting for trial. I just want to understand what are our objectives of what we're doing, because what I'm hearing is a lot of, I'm hearing in the committees that there are a lot of great ideas that we're bouncing off each other, and we're talking about economics, but it's like, yeah. I know there's situations with the economics, and I know there's affordable housing stuff and all those things. Yeah, but what about let's throw some programs out there, and let's really get to the enforcement and of these hot zone or hot spot areas, because that's really in the prosecution of these target demographics, because that's not just what I'm hearing, that's what the community's hearing out there in the public if you're not getting the feedback. So I don't know if people need to clarify their intentions, but that's what's being said. And forgive me if I'm wrong, that's what I'm hearing.
Thank you, Task Force Member Legacy. Let me say, from the vantage point that Co-Chair Coffin and I have been sitting, we've heard prevention programs. We've heard stopping kids before they get into the system. We've heard community engagement. We've heard credible messengers being engaged in the process, and that's from prevention. We've heard what are the tools out there that are available so that we can actually look at some of those red flags and get in front of them. From an intervention perspective, we've looked at, okay, once those young people have gotten into trouble, what do we do to look at vocational, job training? But it's not just working with those young people that have gone into the system. We're also looking at it from a holistic standpoint, from the perspective of, if we invest in that child that we're focused on, we need to look at how do we invest in that family so that we can make sure that that investment is well worth it, as well as to the community. And I can work my way up from an enforcement perspective. And I understand exactly what you're saying, Mr. Legacy. From an enforcement perspective, what we've talked about is the engagement, not just with law enforcement. And if you've noticed, I didn't say the law enforcement subcommittee, the enforcement committee as it relates to public safety, but it's also been in relationship to how do we make sure that we honor the public safety perspective of those communities as well. So it's not arrest. It's also, as Sheriff Mina just identified, what are some of the things that we can do to redirect? And we're having a conversation from a prosecution perspective as it relates to public safety. So it's very holistic, and I look forward to all of those reports rolling up into one so that everybody can see parts and parcel of the discussion. And with that, Bishop-elect McCray, you're recognized.
Thank you so much, Co-Chair. Again, even addressing from the perception of our community, it's definitely not happening as some may see. That's one of the reasons why all the meetings are kind of available for us, because even in our meetings, we have definitely been in discussions about other methods that we can do. And we've been strongly on identifying, kind of going back to, I guess, Bishop Cabarrus' question as well. We've been strongly identifying and working to identify, making sure that some of those who may have been detained are also treated as innocent until proven guilty. And so that has definitely been a discussion within us. And so no, my committee, which is the only one I can speak from, has not been focused on the lockups. We have really been focused on how do we actually get to a healthier community all over again, still understanding that there will be some cases that we do have to enforce, but also we're really working on programs that will help give the same benefits to those regardless of your class, your race, your zip codes. We want to make sure that all of those are equivalent, and that has been a strong effort within our committee in prosecution.
Thank you, Bishop. Taskmember Legacy, you're recognized.
Yes, I just wanted to know, and maybe this is for Mayor Demings, what type of budget are we looking at for the recommendations that are proposed by this task force? Is there a set budget aside of allocated funds so that when we make recommendations that can be allocated to these programs or services? Is there a grant that the county is looking at that they want to apply for in lieu of the recommendations? Because, we can come up with all the suggestions in the world, but if we, and we could have this nice car, but we don't have any gas in the tank, we can't go anywhere. So how much funding, what are we looking at when it comes to a recommendation? Maybe that would help all of the task force kind of understand the parameters that we have to work with.
Okay, I do think that that's a fair question. Some of the answers to the questions that you have made, and perhaps some of the answers to the programs that you will recommend will require additional dollars. Some of it may require just a reallocation or refocus of current dollars that we expend in our community. But I'm committed to it. At an upcoming Board of County Commission meeting, we will advance a budget amendment to the current fiscal year that we're in. Our fiscal year began October 1st of 2020 and will run through September the 30th of 2021. I intend to, within Orange County's budget, put an additional $2 million towards this effort. Of course, the Board of County Commission will have to support that. But that should not and will not, that is insufficient, I believe, to adequately address all of the needs of trying to reduce violent crime in our community. I believe that crime is always a byproduct of a lot of things that have gone wrong. It's a byproduct of social problems. And to fix those social problems, it has to include a holistic approach. There are reasons why we have neighborhoods that have substandard housing. There are reasons why we have individuals who are underemployed, who live in certain neighborhoods. And much of that goes to, I think, the development of the individual. So we intend to, yes, we will apply for various grants from the public sector, but I also believe that within the private sector or the nonprofit sector, there are opportunities there. If this task force does its work, I think, and look at it from a holistic perspective, there will be some other sectors within our community that can bring some dollars to the table. Financial services. As a result of the social justice movement, if you will, that we all experienced in 2020 and beyond will experience, there are lending institutions that have made commitments that they're going to invest in minority communities, et cetera. So I think that we should look for some synergy, to look for collaboration across the spectrum in order to adequately address the challenges before us. So hopefully in what you have heard, you understand that it will require additional dollars, but there are already dollars programmed to do some of what we're talking about in various budgets, and those budgets sometimes are within our municipalities here within our county. They're within, our federal, state, and local budgets. So if we do our job appropriately, we should be able to collaborate in these various efforts. Okay.
Task Force Member Rachel, you're recognized.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond to the conversation that we're having. In our task subcommittee, we've talked about a two-prong approach. So intervention programs with credible messengers and this sort of thing. And I also wanted to point out the mention at the last meeting of the hospital-based interventions. I just found out that Orlando Health just hired a new employee who comes from Providence, Rhode Island, who has experience with this kind of hospital-based intervention. And that segues me to prong two, which is this collective impact model I think that I'm hearing the mayor speak about. When I was handed that spiral binder that showed the services we have in Central Florida, Orange County specifically, I am amazed. And I want you to know that I'm sitting on the Creating a Resilient Community Network, which is a network of over 200 professionals in 9 sector groups that are coming together to build a trauma-informed, resilient community. And every time I say, we should do this, we should think of this, somebody raises their hands and says, we have that program. We do that. It's happening here. So under the Central Florida Foundation's Thrive initiative, where they're taking the sustainable development goals and putting them in 6 buckets and looking at finding funding sources for this in partnership with the Creative Resilient Community Network and the K-Ready initiative, which is looking at early learning and child care, I believe that we could come together as a community and in a collaborative process with the county, with the K-Ready initiative, with the Thrive, with the Creating a Resilient Community Network, we could come together and this could possibly be a recommendation of this task force, go through a community collaborative process that's well designed to put out some kind of collective impact model and perhaps choose a geography, perhaps a zip code or a smaller area in a zip code. And may I recommend we work around one of these community schools like Evans, where we already have a strong program in place. And so we put together a big theory of change, a big idea, a collective impact model, and we give it a go. I believe we have the passion in this community, we have the experience, we have the programs, we have what it needs. I'm looking at Lisa Early. PKZ, a model program that could be scaled. I think that if we use our resources wisely and think together, and by the way, there are other communities that are doing models like this that we're working with and talking to. It's doable. That was my 2 minutes, Commissioner Love.
Thank you. Task Force Member Gabriel, you're recognized.
Thank you. I want to circle back with what Mr. Legacy Cole and Bishop McCray have spoken to. I think Mayor Demings has responded to some degree, and it's on two foci here. Number one, the allocation of funding for the recommendations of the task force, and the second is the implementation of policy recommendations from these task force. I'm mindful of the saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And oftentimes in investments in prevention, you don't see them because you're preventing exactly what you want to do, and so, or what you don't want to see, rather. And so I appreciate that we have 4 task force and that it's a holistic, systemic approach. I think that sometimes when what we're navigating with, and I've been in joint committee meetings, one of the tensions, and I hope that the report bears this out, is that we're dealing with prevention, trying to avoid high crime in targeted zones or zip codes. At the same time, we have existing problems that we want to deal with both on the prevention and intervention side and on the enforcement side. I am hoping that the recommendations that these committees and task force submit to the mayor and to the county rightly allocate the funding both on the prevention side and on the other side, and also put a high priority on the policy practices that help us prevent the things that we don't want to see again. I don't want to be here in another 5 years having the same conversation. And so my recommendation in these 2 minutes is, A, that we rightly prioritize the allocating of funding to help us get to the core issues or the root issues. And number 2, that the policy priorities are so itemized that we do that. And I think we need to look at both enforcement and prevention. But sometimes the prevention stuff is invisible because you're preventing, and I just want to underscore that.
Thank you. Task Force Member Rump, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. And I just want to address the issue about, and we talked about the hot spot. And we understand that there is a small percentage, just a very small percentage of the population that is causing the havoc in the community. And so our concern is that if we would target those hot spots and those that are causing havoc in the community, we could have a better community. Those that's targeting the gangs and the violence that is running havoc through the community, that's causing blight in the community, and it's causing businesses for not wanting to develop in that community. And it's also causing law enforcement to say, the community look at law enforcement and say that you're not doing your job, but we are doing our job. So when we talk about hot spots and targeting those areas, we're saying that for those that small percentage, and I'm sure the Orlando Police Department and the sheriff could address what percentage that's causing the disturbance in the community, that then we need to be more aggressive with those arrests and prosecution. So I do want to present at this time too, if we're not going to move in that direction and being more aggressive for those that's on the street, and then what is the solution for law enforcement? Because it's very disturbing as a law enforcement agency when we do our job, and I'm speaking for me as a probation officer, and I was an officer, probably one of the most lenient officers. I give you breaks after breaks after breaks after breaks after breaks. And then when you continue to violate, and then when you finally don't get a break, and you're prosecuted or you're brought before the court and you're released, you come back and look at me like, ha, 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 ha. See, I'm back on the streets again. And this is what we're trying to avoid. So if you got some suggestions how we can move forward to keep that from happening on the streets, just open the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Task Force Member. You know, one of the things that we're hearing here, and we're having a good, uncomfortable conversation, and we have to have it, but the one thing that we're also hearing from all of the task force subcommittees is we have to develop trust among not just us, but we have to develop trust among the community. Task Force Member Legacy, you're recognized.
Yeah, I have a suggestion. I would think that, well, I think for the community, we need to clarify that when we're talking about hot spots, hot zones, high risk, like we're using kind of hyperbole here, we're talking predominantly in the District 6 area, right? So we could say predominantly those areas that we're targeting are in District 6. And we know about the demographics based upon the data that we're talking about. I would say for a recommendation for law enforcement is to not use a pocket of the percentage of people who you say are causing the havoc in the community, to not blanket and treat everyone as if the entire community is reaping the havoc in the community. Because as Dr. Randy Nelson, he presented, it's not a lack of trust within law enforcement, because they said African Americans are calling law enforcement to the community. So there's not that disconnect. The disconnect is when law enforcement comes into these communities and throws the Constitution out the window and violates our civil rights. That's the disconnect. That's where lies the disconnect when it comes to trust and police community relations, especially when we're talking about our juveniles or our youth. You can't engage the juveniles and the youth and want to do the whip and the nay-nay and go to barbecues and take pictures, and then when the cameras are on, but then when the cameras leave, you're harassing our juveniles and you're putting trumped up charges as the statistics that Ms. Lisa Early spoke to earlier that we were presented in the subcommittees. So there lies the problem. But to just sit there and not take into account those outside factors and or the roots of the problem and the fruit that it bears, and just say, well, we've done all we can, and they're mocking me because of certain percentages, then we want to just go in there and say, well, we need to be more aggressive, more policing in these areas. There's no statistic that you could show that more policing has produced less crime.
Chair, look. Thank you, Task Force Member. Let me say this too, and I appreciate your comments. When we began as a task force, we were tasked with looking across the board in all of Orange County. One of the other things that Dr. Nelson has educated us on is we need to go where the data tells us the disproportionate problem is, and that's where we have found ourselves. So yes, and I'm not calling out districts, because I will tell you, I would be one of those individuals that would be offended. And I believe in the prevention subcommittee, we rewrote some of the language that identified certain communities and called certain communities hotspots. But one of the things that no matter where you go or what you say, the data will take us to where the problem is. And the problem that we've identified is the problem of gun violence, the problem of serious violent offenses. And at the end of the day, we need to direct not only our resources there, we need to direct our collaborations. And we're not going to always agree on the best way to get there, but a lot of the dialogue that we've had in the subcommittees, as well as the dialogue that we're having here, which again, this conversation that we're having, if we leave out of here singing Kumbaya, we haven't gotten anything done. So I can appreciate the conversation. But again, our charge was to go where the data takes us. And in addition to that, at some of the community meetings that I've been attendance of, people are becoming educated as it relates to, yes, law enforcement has its issues, and we're going to work those out. But in addition to that, the community is becoming educated on the fact that when they see somebody back in their community and an offense has taken place, they want public safety just like anybody else, but they also realize now there's other components to that, such as the courts, such as the state attorney's office. And that's why we're having this conversation and dialogue, so that we can fix what needs to be fixed. With some of us, we have a tool belt. That tool belt does us no good if we don't have all the tools that we need to use. But thank you once again, Task Force Member Legacy. That's the kind of conversation that we need to have, but we need to also know we're going where the data takes us.
Chair Love.
Mayor Demings, you recognize.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to respond to some of what I've heard. I can tell you that this effort is going to be an ongoing effort. You might be back in 5 years having this conversation. I don't want anyone to have any false hope or expectations that anything that we do today is going to solve these issues forever. No, we live in a human experience. We will always have to come back and address these issues. I don't believe that the issues are solely focused on any particular geographical area. I've been involved in this work long enough now to know that you can squeeze the area pretty hard and get it under control, but then it's like silly putty. It starts oozing out around you, and you have to look at it from a much more holistic approach, because having been the sheriff, having been the police chief, and having been a street cop working all over this area, I can tell you that every neighborhood has some dysfunctionality, if we're being honest about it. If you think you live in a neighborhood and you don't have a problem, you're just not well informed. So this committee really has to look at it broadly and not stereotype any particular community. I believe it was Ms. Rump asked what percentage of people, are involved in the system. It's a very low percentage. We're a county of about 1.4 million people. On an annual basis, through our Orange County Jail, we book somewhere between maybe 34,000 and 40,000 people. Let's go with the high number. If we were booking 40,000 people through our jail on an annual basis, if every one of them was a different person, that would represent about 2.8% of our population. But of course, there's a lot of recidivism. The same people get arrested multiple times. So when you talk about our society, the overwhelming majority of our children, of our youth, do precisely what they're supposed to be doing. But we do spend a lot of our resources, your taxpayer dollars, trying to fix the broken people who are broken for various reasons. When we look at Orange County's budget, overall, about 40% of our budget, our operating budget, is for public safety. Then the rest of the things that we have to do as a county, we never have enough money to do everything. That's why we have to partner with the private sector, the philanthropic sector. So sometimes we do get discouraged when bad things happen in our community. We don't celebrate enough of what's good and positive about our community. But the work of this task force has been somewhat jaded, because you are dealing with the underbelly of our community. And that's tough work when you're working in that space. It is not going to be easy. It is not something that you all are going to just resolve with the recommendations from this task force. No. The goal, however, is to move the needle. Okay. With the recommendations, my commitment to you has been that we're going to move the needle. We're going to advance the football down the field. We may not make the touchdown, but we're going to advance the football down the field. With your help, if you continue to remain focused on why you're here and don't get dismayed because things don't happen quickly. This work is going to take decades to get to where we need to be. And I want you to be realistic about it, because the work didn't just start with this task force. This is ongoing work.
Thank you, Mayor
over
Davis.
to the chair.
Thank you, Mayor Davis. I'd like to recognize Task Force Member Scott.
Thank you, Chair Love. I shared some of these comments with the subcommittee, and I'll share here for the greater benefit, mainly towards law enforcement. You guys may know I do a lot of mentoring and work with young people, but myself, TJ, Miles, and a number of others, I've come to understand that people expect us to police the police. So when you guys are having interactions that they don't think that are favorable, they text us, they go live and tag us to, or they inbox us. I had a number of those situations. When it comes to the information that you guys provide, I think in the initial binder it was 30 arrests. Lisa mentioned quantify those arrests so we know which ones are violent or not violent, because someone could have been arrested a lot of times for violent crimes. I'll give you guys some recent examples between December and January. I may go about 30 seconds over, but so there was a shooting. This is an OPD case where there was a double shooting. One of the young men that was killed was one of my mentees from the very beginning when I started. And I get there and I'm talking to, the sergeant and the detective, and I think in that situation with Orlando police, but with any law enforcement, is that the frustration came not from the shooting, but because the family members, specifically the mothers or the baby mamas, forgive the slang there, but the baby mothers didn't know what was going on. And I think had someone educated them on what the steps of the process was, hey, we have to get a warrant, we have to do this, this, and this, we can't give information, I think that would have eased a lot of the frustrations. And this is like 30-something degrees the day after Christmas at like 1 in the morning. And so I got his mom to come there, she talked to the detective, and that worked out. Even today, and this is an Orange County situation, I had a young man in his 20s, again, who I've worked with for a long time. He got arrested. He got released. The detective, which I appreciate, or whoever the investigator is on the case, called him and said, hey, you have another warrant. Do you want to turn yourself in today or Monday? So I appreciate that the detective did call him and talk with him, but I'm like, you just got out of jail, and they're going to arrest you again only so you can bond out again? And then switching back to another Orlando police case, I had another young man arrested for trespassing after warning. The biggest thing I guys want you to understand is we have some kids and some young people that make mistakes, but if I have a kid that I'm trying to make it and you arrest a child for a minor crime or something small, the $100 that I'm trying to use to save that kid or my grandkid, I have to use to bond out. So just educate the community when you are doing the things that you need to do. That's my biggest thing. Thank you.
Thank you. See Task Force Member Early, is your light on? You're recognized.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mike, for those comments. And Mayor Demings, you're a tough act to follow. I just want to make this point to all of the task force members in your conversations and considerations. My background, my bachelor's degree is in child development, and I was particularly interested in adolescent development. And a lot of the behaviors that end up putting our youth in the criminal justice system are actually considered normal behaviors among youth, let's say teenagers, early 20s. They're normal things. They do stupid things, they do risky things. I don't know how any of you were as teenagers. I'm sure Mayor Demings was very straight and never broke laws or did risky things, but I can talk about myself as a teenager. I did lots of things that would have gotten me arrested easily and jailed, but I was a white girl growing up in a middle-class community in a different time and place, a time when we didn't criminalize all these kinds of things, when you could smoke a joint in the back of your high school and everybody was doing it and nobody called the police. I raised my 2 sons here in Orlando. They did a lot of risky things that were normal. One of my sons had a fake ID and got into bars with it, and I know both of them smoked pot from time to time. So these are things that kids mature out of. They grow out of. And in the broader national conversation about, should the police be, or should the criminal justice system be the response to so many different things, or should there be other systems that respond? I would say this: what programs do we have out there for older youth? Things that they can have positive adult role models, taking them places on field trips, doing community service activities, helping them with school, doing positive things when they're out out there, you know, instead of being unsupervised, hanging around with other teenagers, doing the kinds of things that teenagers do? And how can we as a community have a response to these things that don't put them in the criminal justice system?
Thank you, Task Force Member. Task Force Member Gabriel, you're recognized.
Thank you. I want to respond to the mayor. I appreciate your clarification of my comments. What I meant to say, and I appreciate your elucidation, no one here has a naivete that we're going to fix systemic problems, I don't think. I do think that what I mean by not being back here again is that if we return and the policy recommendations that we made 5 years ago or 10 years ago are still haven't been implemented, there's going to be pushback by the constituencies that we serve and the people that we love and that we are all here for on our time. And so I want to clarify that statement. I do appreciate, Mr. Mayor, and I agree 100%. I used to work in Newark and you know, 2 and 3 decades, and we still were doing some of this. So I appreciate the metaphor of moving the ball down the field, and we're all here to do that. So I want to applaud and affirm that. I appreciate the clarification that it's a small group of people. I think I don't know your name, but from the Enforcement Committee kept talking. It's about 3 to 5% of the people that have high rates of recidivism in the high crime rate areas or high violent crime rate areas, and we're trying to get to that. My point again, and maybe for the clarification, given your gentle nudge, is that we want to make sure that we're really, if it's really 3 to 5%, we can make a significant dent if our focus is in that area, both on the prevention side and on the enforcement side. My point here is only to say we need an all of the above strategy, not an either or strategy. And I think that's why the holistic system that you highlighted, Mr. Mayor, is important to us. But I really want to take issue that I don't think anyone's coming us from a place of naivete about the systemic and long-term structures that exist.
Thank you. Task Force Member Chief McKinley, you're recognized.
I just have one quick comment, then Sheriff Mina has a comment after mine. We talked about the state attorney's office and what hadn't been done. As she stated, she's only been in office 1 week, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say what she has done, which is a great milestone in a relationship here. She's reached out and she's attending the Orange Osceola County Police Chiefs Association meeting next Thursday to meet with all the police chiefs and the sheriffs in Orange and Osceola County. So that's a step ahead. She's also made appointments with each one of the chiefs in the Orange County, as far as I know, to meet with us and sit down and listen to us. So I think we're going in the right direction. We're looking forward to working with her, and we're looking forward to those meetings. So,
Sheriff Mina, you're recognized. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Love. So I will also echo Chief McKinley's statements about our new state attorney. We've already had very positive dialogue, and that dialogue is going to continue, and the willingness to partner with law enforcement to keep those violent offenders off of our streets is very, very welcome. So just a few comments from some of the subcommittees and then some of the open discussion that I do want to cover. Early on in the prevention subcommittee, there was mention of minor offenses like failure to appear. Don't forget that many of those offenses, such as failure to appear, are warrants that were signed by a judge for us to go take that juvenile into custody. So those are many of those arrests, but we could certainly provide statistics for everyone. And again, so for every juvenile arrest you see, what you don't see is thousands and thousands and thousands of interactions, many times positive. Sometimes the juveniles involved in minor offenses, such as Ms. Early was talking about, and those. I have 2 boys. I know they make bad decisions. There's thousands and thousands of interactions that we never hear about, where juveniles are released to their parents, or they're let go, or like, hey kid, you got to choose that path. You have to go right here. You can't go left down this path, or it's going to end you up in jail. So those are some of the things that are not documented, I would say. And as far as community engagement, and I will say, yes, we post pictures of ourselves with kids at barbecues and all those things. And the reason we do that is because, again, there are thousands and thousands of interactions that the public never sees. That, long before body-worn cameras and cell phone cameras, Chief McKinley and I and Captain Lane over there and others were playing basketball in the streets with our kids, and mostly in our underserved population. So while I realize that our profession is certainly not perfect, the reason we are here, one of the main reasons we're here, because 3-year-old Daquan Felix was killed along with 2 young teenage boys from violence committed in communities, and we are here to stop that. So there will be enforcement. We will continue to engage with our community in a positive way. We will continue to see the decrease in juvenile arrests. And, I was actually very proud of that stat. 67% decrease in juvenile arrests since 2014. That is significant progress. And I get the feeling, and I've heard this over the past couple of task force meetings, that the things we're doing are not good enough. Well, the men and women at the Orlando Police Department, at the Orange County Sheriff's Office, POPCA and others are committed to this task force, are committed to the safety of this community at risk to our own lives. And we know it has to be done, okay? And like I said, we are not a perfect profession. No profession is. But we have made incremental steps over these past several decades, and even the past 3 or 4 years or 5 years, in a positive and meaningful way that I think needs to be celebrated. And so lastly, I did want to cover the comments, because I heard it twice about law enforcement and domestic violence. I would like if the entire committee could see that study, if that could be emailed to us. I have not seen it, but I will say I have 0 tolerance for domestic violence at the Orange County Sheriff's Office. Of the 2 people who have been accused of domestic violence, they were both terminated despite their criminal charges being dropped, and we did seek risk protection orders in both those cases. So we have 0 tolerance for domestic violence, and that will definitely continue under my leadership. That is all. And then I'll just finally end with we're committed to this task force. I agree with many of the things the mayor said, and we're in it for a long haul. All of us in this room, we've been doing this for nearly 30 years, and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears on these same streets, and we will continue to do that for this community.
Thank you, Sheriff Mena. Taskmember Cabarrus, you're recognized.
Thank you, Co-Chair. I have 2 questions, but I asked the first one in for a response and then the second. My question is toward law enforcement and all the law enforcement leaders here today. Mayor Dimmons has not only demonstrated commitment to this issue by calling this task force and saying that he's going to put not only his efforts but funding behind it, but he said something that should be highlighted. Even the $2 million that he spoke of is not sufficient to cover or support any of the things that I believe that are going to be recommended. Of course, during the time of protest last year, many of the things that have been said across America was the statements of defund the police, which in essence what that means in my understanding as it is articulated is about redirecting funds of the law enforcement agency toward some of these issues, problems that we're having with juveniles, or problems that we have within our community. My question to law enforcement leadership is, are you prepared or have you begun to think about some measures of where, as the mayor said that he's presenting $2 million, that you can look at your budget and see what you can do to come alongside the mayor, come alongside the private sector, come alongside others to help fund some of these very issues. I'm not saying take away from what we need to for law enforcement to advance and do their job, but are there funds, are you any discussions of funds being redirected toward prevention causes or intervention causes amongst our juveniles as well from the law enforcement budget aspect?
Sheriff Mena, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair Love. Thank you. Can you hear me? Hello? All right, there we go. Thank you. So I can assure you, Bishop, that all of the funds that the Orange County Sheriff's Office asked for this year, we need to help keep this community safe. And when you're talking about funding some of these programs, you are talking about millions of dollars. So I will tell you that the Orange County Sheriff's Office does not have $1 million to fund some of these programs. The only way we get to that number is cutting of personnel. And the discussions I've had with constituents all across the county is they want more law enforcement in their neighborhoods, not less law enforcement. So while I am supportive of these programs and the funding of these programs, I'm not willing to sacrifice the safety of our community. Again, there is a very small percentage, but there is a percentage of people who will cause harm to our community and really make it miserable for some people in their neighborhoods. Now, I will say, as far as our budget, we have been extremely fiscally responsible, just like Mayor Demings before me at the Orange County Sheriff's Office. We average annually giving back about $1.5 million to the county of unexpended funds, and those are funds through attrition and other impact fees as well. So we've been very fiscally responsible, and I can assure you every penny that we spend is scrutinized, and those funds are needed for the safety of this community.
Bishop Cabarrus, quick follow-up, please.
Sheriff Meade, I understand that, but I have worked with previous sheriffs and administrations for years in this county, as well as the chiefs of police, et cetera, for years. All of them in previous administration, not only in the sheriff's office in the city of Orlando, but in other municipalities, have also used some of their funding to help support some of the initiatives of the communities and programmatic piece, and even some of my faith-based organizations have been benefactors. As a matter of fact, the Enough is Enough program that we had some years ago, the success of it was because there was a partnership between law enforcement, mental health, the community, and et cetera, which means that law enforcement made investment into a program. I'm not in any way saying that we need to take away from our law enforcement. I support law enforcement. I support law and order, but I also support all of us putting what we need to put on the table to do what we need to do collectively to work toward ending this issue and plight we have.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, Bishop Cabarrus.
Chair Love. Michael Scott. Just my biggest point with law enforcement is just to educate when you're having those interactions. I know sometimes it may be high stress, they may be aggressive verbally, and sometimes physically, but just kind of educating, because I see that a lot of times when you educate what's going on, the frustration, the confusion goes away. And to speak to what Sheriff Mina said, there has been a downward. If you look back 15 years ago at Orange County Jail, we had upwards of 100, 105, 115 juveniles in adult jail as young as 13. You look at today, and there are like 11 or 12, and that's a combination of efforts of law enforcement and the state attorney's office. But one last point I want to make is that, and again, I've seen it from both agencies, most recently with Orlando Police. I, from a military standpoint, understand different processes and procedures. The everyday person doesn't. So when you talk about like a barricaded suspect with or without hostages, I understand the process. I'll also understand that there will be opportunities that present themselves where you can train newer staff. But recently, Orlando Police, there was a call, domestic call, I believe it was, where you had 2 SWAT teams and what the community calls tanks, but they were personnel carriers, come in on both sides. You had drones and I believe at least 3 or 4 snipers set up. And then you had the mobile command unit. So when you come into a community like that, they're like, what's going on from a 911 call? So I think it would help the relations when you explain, hey, what's happening? This is why we're doing this to someone, or whether it's myself or whoever's there, so that it eases the frustration with the community. Because if you come into an apartment complex with something like that and people don't know what's going on, it makes it frustration, and it's scary, because I was there the entire time, and I counted. It was like maybe 4, and I'm being conservative, 4 sniper setups, the drone, both of the carriers, a mobile command unit on Ivy Lane, stuff like that. And I've seen it with both agencies, more specifically Ivy Lane, and Timber Scan is usually the sheriff's office when they do that. So just communicate and educate when you guys are doing what you do.
Sheriff Meade, if you'd like to respond. And lastly, we're going to recognize Task Force Member Rump, and then I'm going to pass it to my co-chair for next steps.
So first, in response to the Bishop Cabrera, so last year we gave nearly 40% of our forfeiture funds to community programs in Orange County, and we are doing another $100,000 this year. That's over $300,000 to local nonprofits, mentoring, crime prevention initiatives in this community. So that commitment to our community has continued. And as far as the last comments, absolutely, I'm certain we could do a better job communicating to the community when we have those situations in neighborhoods that do require that type of equipment. And remember, that type of equipment used is not only to protect the deputies and officers, but also to protect those neighborhoods. But certainly we can communicate with our communities to try and let them know as best possible what is going on and why we're doing that, if practical and if we can.
Task Force Member Rump, you're recognized.
Thank you. I'm going to yield my time to my co-person, Nancy Ash. Her hand was up before mine, and you probably could not see it behind the camera. So, Nancy, go ahead on.
Nancy, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rump. I have spoken with people throughout the community and asked them how they feel police can improve, and guess what the majority of them have said to me? They feel that the police here do a pretty good job. No recommendations. I do, recognizing the fact, though, that police undergo enormous stress, as evidenced by statistics of a high rate of suicide, alcoholism, domestic violence, etc., and plus coupled with all the negativity that they see every day. I'd like to know what programs there are to help police officers in Orlando, Orange County, and Apopka. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up. Something it is a stressful job. It is like a profession like no other. Very highly scrutinized, as you can see, but we know that going in. I think the good news is, even with all that's happened over the past several years, more and more people in our community, even young people, want to become law enforcement and want to join the profession. However, there are things, having been doing this for 30 years, it does take a toll. So I'll speak for Orange County and a little bit for Orlando because I know the programs there, but we have great programs in place, from critical incident stress management teams to our own insurance, and then finally through UCF Restores, which is a program that really started for soldiers experiencing PTSD. All of those programs are available to our deputies and officers. All of them are anonymous. In addition to that, we have, at most of the agencies, we have chaplains that deputies and officers can talk to if needed. And so those programs are in place. We've had great success with all of those programs. I know there are a number of nonprofits in the area that do help our law enforcement out. So that the help is there, and I will say that sometimes the difficult part of that is actually the deputy, the officer coming forward, or even their fellow deputies or officers, seeing something and recognizing something as far as work performance. And but so what we have done at all the agencies, we have basically shared the message that it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to come forward to say, hey, I'm having a hard time. So when I first started, if you would have done that, they take your badge away, they send you home. So now when that happens, that person is not ostracized. They're given the help that they need. So I think certainly we are definitely on the right path in our profession as a whole, and then locally here, the agencies are ahead of the game as far as nationally is concerned.
Thank you, Sheriff. I see 2 lights that have been on. I want to ask you, please, if you could be very succinct so that we can move to our next steps. I want to recognize Task Force Member TJ Legacy, then Bishop Cabarrus, and Chief McKinley. Did I see your light on?
If I could, just real quick, I was going to follow up to what Sheriff Mina said. We also have, I mean, we all do pretty much the same thing. We have a peer-to-peer program within the agencies where our officers are trained so that the other officers that might be in crisis can reach out to those officers, and they know the resources within our community to refer them to and assist them and stay with them as they overcome whatever crisis they may be in. I think it's also important that everybody in all the committees understand that the Orange Osceola County Police Chiefs Association, which Sheriff Mina and the Osceola County Sheriff attends, we meet monthly and we work on ensuring that our policies are somewhat consistent with each other so that law enforcement throughout the Ninth Circuit is somewhat similar and operating in the same manner, so that we're not got these disparate agencies going off and doing different things. We share policies all the time. We talk to each other all the time. We all have a great relationship with all the chiefs and the sheriffs. And I think it's important that everybody understands that we're trying to bring some kind of consistency in law enforcement within the Ninth Circuit. So, thank you.
Thank you, Chief McKinley. You're recognized, TJ Legacy.
I just want to go back to Bishop Cabarrus's point about asking law enforcement, specifically the Orange County Sheriff's Department, to put some stake in the game and meet the mayor where he said he would allocate $2 million, and then the sheriff saying that he didn't, you know, they didn't have any funds. But over the summer, you just asked the Orange County Commission for $15 million. So when you have someone like a Michael Scott saying that he's using his resources to put some stake in the game, and then telling the community that you just asked for $15 million additional dollars in funds, that, oh, you don't have any funds to put towards any of the recommendations that are being put forth by the task force that you sit on, is extremely telling. And I don't know where people are talking or who's talking to, but I don't know a community that you can go to in any place where they will tell you that, and you ask them how law enforcement is doing, and they will unanimously say that they're doing a great job with no recommendations. That, along with saying that law enforcement needs to be more aggressive in some of these zones, rings extremely tone deaf to me. So, thank you.
Member Cabarrus, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I would like to just follow up with a question, I guess, to our co-chairs. Somehow, as we are putting these themes of proposals or recommendations together to present back to the mayor, we've heard from a lot of our community leaders. Some of them have an understanding of what's going on in this community. Some of them don't. Some of them know by data. They know by information that they've read. They know by information what they don't know based upon actually being engaged with the very community that we are talking about serving. I think that we need to be very careful that before we put together recommendations of any kind, that we need to provide a space to hear from our community, to hear from credible messengers, to hear from others that are engaged. Like you've heard, Michael Scott is here, and TJ and Miles, all of those individuals. But I'm talking about even others who are actually ones that are victims of this or have been a part of victimizing. I think hearing from them and getting some information as well can be helpful to all of these subcommittees as we continue to work toward recommendations, because I don't want us to make our recommendations based upon just our feelings and what we think, but we want to make sure that the very zip code and target area that is the most maligned and affected by many of these systemic issues are heard in this manner. That's my question and challenge to you.
Well said, Commissioner Task Force Member Cabarrus. And what we will do is we'll report back to the full task force based on your recommendation. I want to pass it to my co-chair for next steps, Mr. Coffin.
Yeah, I'd like to thank all of you for your participation and your forthrightness. And sometimes they're difficult conversations to have, and yet we need to have them so that we can move on and so we can meet the challenges that are there and achieve what needs to be achieved. We have quite a bit of work ahead of us. We have about 7 weeks to go, and we, by that time, would hope to have all of our recommendations together so that we could pass them on to be formally written and then presented to the mayor and the county commission. Our next full task force meeting is going to be on Wednesday, February 10. It's going to be from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. at the Goldenrod Recreation Center Magic Gym. And so if you could put that in your calendar, if you don't have it there already, that would be good. Also, you have been given in your various task force subcommittees the little card that has to do with the Citizen Safety Task Force Survey. And we would like to have this sort of spread like the leaves of autumn to try to get people involved in this, because we want as much information as we can possibly get from as broad a sector of the community as we can get. And this is available online, and it's www.ocfl.net/crime-survey. So it can be taken online. If you'd like to have it printed out, send an email to Carol Burkett, and you have her email address because she has sent you so many things already that you definitely would have to recognize it. And just let her know that you would like to have some actually printed copies of this that you could hand out, hard copy, and she'll be happy to get that to you. And I would just mention that this is not only in English, but this is in Spanish and also in Haitian Creole. So that way we're trying to definitely include as broad a section of the community as we can. And I've mentioned Carol Burkett, and who is the liaison between the mayor's office, the county office, and also those of us on the task force. So there may be data that you would like to have. And she's the person to contact if you'd like to have her get data. And it takes a little bit of time to get this, and so don't leave it till the last moment and say, I want this, in 2 minutes. But give her as much warning as you can that you'd like to have the data and what it is that you specifically want. And she will contact the appropriate agency to try to get that. And the notices of our meetings are posted on the website for the safety task force, and so you can definitely go there to get the information that you need. And if you have suggestions that you'd like to make, certainly feel free to do that. And that is also at citizensafety@ocfl.net. You can post your suggestions there, or you can certainly pass them on to the co-chairs and the subcommittees, or to the co-chairs of the whole task force, or to the liaisons who are there from the county. And so as far as I know, that's about all we have to cover today. Co-chair Love, is there anything else you wanted to say?
Just to say to everybody here today, thank you. To the community that's been participating, thank you. And we all get frustrated with one another, criminal justice agencies, and to our new state attorney, Worrell, you have one particular initiative that you just rolled out that I want to also say to you, let us know how we can help you. Let us know what you need, but you're out the gate running, and we appreciate that. To all the members here again, this is the kind of conversation that we need to continue to have as we get close to that March 10th date. Thank you once again, and I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Second, so moved. We're adjourned.